The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference.
I don't know, I'm pretty satisfied with the explanation of the evolutionists.
Yes, I do believe we are descended from animals.
Evolution is obvious.
Man was not created in God's image. God was created in man's image in order to address those things about which we were ignorant.
I think part of the grand joke of it all is that, before there was feet, there was flippers. Before there was lungs, there was gills. And, it's all part of that process that got us where we are today, gridlocked and angry.
I sometimes wonder why anybody talks about anything else, because this is the most interesting topic there is.
I believe humans evolved to where we are today from single-celled organisms based on the theory of Darwinism and natural selection. I don't think that there was any sort of divine intervention.
I believe evolution is pretty much a proven theory.
I don't believe in a higher order. Just because the fact that I haven't seen any, proof or, concrete evidence of that, and until somebody shows me, that there is, then I'm going to have an aversion to organized religion, and I'm going to stay on the basis of chemical evolution.
I think we should look at the history of religion and be fascinated by it, just as we look at the history of art and so on. But I don't think that religion has anything useful to teach us. It sounds very laudable to teach the controversy, to teach both theories, but there aren't two theories. There's only one theory around. There's only one game in town as far as serious science is concerned. Of course, you get negative reactions from creationists, but who cares about creationists? They don't know anything. I think it was my father who first introduced me to Darwinian evolution. I was immensely moved by it, and it did start a roller coaster in a way, and then I started to become really quite anti-religious after that. Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Before that, you could be an atheist, Hume was, for example, but it was quite difficult because you had no good explanation for why living things look so well designed. Darwin provided that.
So Dawkins basically says that it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. So, pulled his punches once again. So evolution today is taught as fact. If you were to go to virtually any educational institution, and you were to try and even begin to go down the track that evolution is just a theory, you'll find that many of the professors and certainly many evolutionists would bristle at the mere thought that you would think that this is anything but absolute truth. And so we go on the web and we see that evolution is a fact. The theory of evolution is how the process happens. Sorry, but a fact is a fact, whether you believe it or not. And so when you go and you look around, it's just controversy everywhere. There is huge amounts of nonsense and battles going on at the moment. And this is at the forefront of everything. Because the truth of the matter is this. You've got two options, as we've said before. You either believe that there is a designer, a creator, that caused everything to come into being, or the only other option that you're really left with is the concept of evolution. There is nothing in between. Just to kick off, I want to just let you know that if you embrace an evolutionary worldview, and a lot of people glibly saw, as we saw in the video, oh, I believe in evolution, I believe that we came from fish, or I believe, we're all descended from animals. If you're going to really think that through, you need to understand that when you embrace a worldview such as evolutionism, you embrace there's a lot more that comes along with that. And I've got just a few things here that are implications of an evolutionary worldview. If you have an evolutionary worldview, you will obviously believe that God did not create life, and God did not create man. That's pretty much obvious. There are people that are theistic evolutionists that attempt to marry what the Bible teaches and what evolution teaches, and they in fact say that God created man via evolution. I personally reject that very strongly. I know that a lot of people would disagree with me, but I do not believe my Bible teaches me that God used evolution to create all of us. All right? You would need to believe that matter is the only reality, because evolution is founded in a materialistic and naturalistic worldview that teaches that matter is the cause of everything. There is no supernatural. Morality is an illusion. If you really understand evolution and the way that it functions and what it teaches, we are simply the products of survival of the fittest, of natural selection, of genetic mutation, and therefore morality is just an illusion, something created by society to suit society. All races are not equal. Well, obviously they're not. And that's one of the prime reasons that Hitler and others committed genocide. The whole concept is that we are not equal, that certain people are fitter and more worthy than others and have more right, therefore, to survive. Life has no real meaning or value. And we saw the statement from Darwin in the video that we've just seen, talking about blind, pitiless, cold indifference. And the hope that evolution offers you is essentially that the universe will eventually continue to expand and expand and expand until we will be alone with no visibility of any other stars, any other galaxies, in a cold universe that is slowly growing colder and colder until everything just ceases to be. Man has no purpose other than to reproduce. That's what we are. We're just here to spread our DNA. All right? Man is an animal, no more valuable than any other animal or any other creature. Jesus taught that the sparrows are purchased for a few pennies, but take heart, because you are of far more value than many sparrows. In the concept of Christianity, man is of a different order of magnitude to the animals. Evolution, clearly not. In fact, I haven't got the quotations in this particular one. I did include it last year, where we have prominent evolutionists teaching that a species of mosquito is more valuable to preserve than human life. The strong should be encouraged to dominate over the weak. So these are just some of the outcomes or the natural consequences of an evolutionary worldview. So what is meant by the word evolution? This is really important that you get this today. Okay, if there's nothing else you carry away from this, I want you to understand what is meant by evolution. All right. Evolution as common descent, or what we call GTE, that stands for the general theory of evolution. And generally, when I talk about my opposition to evolution or my disdain for evolution, when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to GTE, the general theory of evolution, that teaches that we all came common descent from a common ancestor. And the general theory of evolution states the following: the theory that all living forms in the world, everything in the world, has arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. All right? So the general theory of evolution holds to two of the following claims, and we're going to discuss these. The general theory of evolution teaches abiogenesis, that essentially compounds and chemicals and molecules got together and formed a protocell, the first ancestor that we all came from. Essentially, abiogenesis teaches that non-life gave rise to life. All right? That is a fundamental teaching of the general theory of evolution. All right? Secondly, the general theory of evolution teaches the concept of common descent. That from that non-life that formed the single protocell from which we all came, that protocell itself then evolved to form every other form of life that we have. Those are the two things, abiogenesis and common descent. The other type of evolution that I want to talk about is evolution as change over time. Some people refer to it as biological evolution. I like to refer to it as adaptation or simply microevolution. Now, I need you to understand that as a creationist and as a Bible believer, I have no problem whatsoever with that definition of evolution. That definition of evolution simply implies that creatures adapt and change over time. Now, GTE, the general theory of evolution, teaches that as well. Where we differ is in the amount of change that can happen over time. I have a problem with molecules to man. All right? But I have no problem with a creature adapting to a different environment. All right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, evolution as change over time or microevolution. Biological evolution is a change in the genetic characteristics of a population over time. This happens as a fact. All right? No problem. Biological evolution holds that this change is by means of genetic variation, natural selection, and speciation. Now, the important thing that I want you to grasp here is that many times, people like Dawkins and so forth mix these two types of evolution in a single sentence. They will start off talking about the general theory of evolution, and then they will refer to the change over time form of evolution as support for the argument for the general theory of evolution. And remember, we called that logical fallacy. Do you remember what we called that? Come on, somebody. Begins with an E. Equivocation. Give yourself a raise. Equivocation. When you take a word and in the middle of an argument you switch the meaning of that word for another meaning. Equivocation. And we'll see that. So equivocation is very often used by particularly Richard Dawkins, where he's trying to support or argue for the general theory of evolution, but uses, in the middle of the argument, switches to the adaptation version or the biological version of evolution. All right. Evolution is not a theory. Evolution is a constantly observed, reviewed, and never once disproved fact. All right. Well, which evolution are we talking about that is constantly observed, reviewed, and never once disproved fact? What evolution are we talking about there? We're talking about microevolution or adaptation or small changes in something, chemical, not chemical evolution. We're talking about the second of the evolutions we're talking about there, microevolution. We're not talking about the general theory of evolution. But then they go on to say, if this conflicts with your religious beliefs, then I suggest you observe and review whatever it is that you believe. Evolution is backed by tangible evidence. Well, if they're talking about microevolution there and adaptation, amen, brother, I 100% agree with you. But they're not. If you read the context of these people, they're talking about molecules to man. All right? Pond scum to people. So there's a statement here by Jonathan Safati. He puts it very well. He says, it's really important that words such as evolution are used accurately and consistently. However, many evolutionary propagandists are guilty of the deceitful practice of equivocation. That is, switching the meaning of a single word, such as evolution, partway through an argument. A common tactic, bait and switch, is simply to produce examples of change over time and call this evolution, and then apply that the GTE is thereby proven or even essential, and creation has been disproved. So please watch for that. It's a very, very common thing. I'm going to play a quick little 2-minute video of Richard Dawkins doing his thing. I found this an interesting video because here is essentially the most militant, out there type of person that you can get. He's a biological evolutionist, and he talks about evolution very, very powerfully. And I found this quite interesting because I'll play it for you, and then I just want to talk a little bit about it. So just listen carefully to what he has to say.
I had said that evolution is a fact in the same sense as it's a fact that the Earth orbits the Sun. And somebody wrote in about that saying, it isn't a theory the Earth moves around the Sun, it's a fact we can observe. Evolution is not. Now, I see why he says that, because you sort of think, well, the Earth's moving around the Sun all the time, and therefore you can observe it, whereas you can't actually observe evolution because it happened a long time ago, or mostly it did. But really, you can't observe that the Earth moves around the Sun. What you observe is the changing seasons, and you infer that the Earth moves around the Sun because you have an interpretation, you have a theory to account for why you get changing seasons. In the same way, you observe that night follows day and day follows night. You don't actually observe that the Earth is spinning. You have a theory that the Earth is spinning, and it accounts for the facts. And it's just the same way with evolution. It's true that we can't actually observe at least the major features of evolution happening. We can observe very, very recent, very tiny bits of evolution happening. It's true that we can't watch dinosaurs evolving. We can't watch fish emerging from the sea and becoming land animals. We have to make inferences, and we make inferences on the basis of the evidence available, in just the same way as we make inferences about the Earth's orbit by looking at the seasons and the Earth spinning by looking at the day-night cycle.
I found that a fascinating little video from someone as esteemed as him. And I just want to bring a couple of things to your attention. He has so many swipes at us that I can't resist the opportunity to just give a little bit back. He says that evolution is a fact in the same sense as it is a fact that the Earth orbits the Sun. Do we see something profoundly wrong with that statement? He's basically saying that evolution is a fact, okay, in the same way as the Earth orbiting the Sun is a fact. Can we see the Earth orbiting the Sun? We can. It's very simple to see the Earth orbiting the Sun. In fact, there's currently one of the voyages going out, traveling out of our solar system that is in fact seeing exactly that happening. In fact, we can actually see that. We can observe it. Is it happening now? Is it something we can observe? Is it something that's repeatable? It's something that we can observe and we can see. But is evolution that he's referring to here, GTE, something we can't? So again, there's a disjoint. It's a statement that doesn't make any sense. The conclusion doesn't follow correctly from the premise. He says you can't actually observe evolution because it happened a long time ago. Very good statement. It's really good to hear him actually say that. You cannot observe evolution. It happened a long time ago. You can't observe that the Earth moves around the Sun. What you observe is the changing seasons, and you infer that the Earth moves around the Sun. Not true at all. You can go to Google today and watch the Earth going around. You can watch the Earth rotating. You don't observe the Earth is spinning. Yes, you do. I can show you the Earth spinning. I can actually show you it happening. Okay? You have a theory that the Earth is spinning. I don't have a theory that the Earth is spinning. I can see the Earth is spinning. I know, and I can watch it actually happening from a satellite. So to equate the Earth spinning and call it a theory, and then to use that to support your argument for evolution is just nonsense. I don't expect to hear that type of logic from somebody of that type of preeminence. Can you see what I'm trying to get at here? It's just ludicrous. He says, we can't observe the major features of evolution happening. Only very recent tiny bits of it happening. What's he talking about there? adaptation, microevolution. But he's using that to essentially support GTE evolution, which is where the big game is. Again, the conclusion doesn't follow correctly from the premises. We have to make inferences based on the evidence available. I'm so glad to hear him say that, and we've covered that before, where evolution essentially, because you cannot see it happening, GTE, you have to make, what does he call it? Inferences, and we called it assumptions. You have to make assumptions based on the evidence, he says, just the same way that we make inferences about the Earth's orbit. I don't make inferences about the Earth's orbit. It's something that is observable, repeatable, and testable now. It's not something that happened. If the Earth stopped orbiting the sun 4,000 years ago, I would agree with him, but it hasn't. I don't make inferences. Again, the logic of the argument I just found fascinating. Life from non-life, yes. The Greek word bios is life, and abiogenesis is without. So it's without life, okay? And genesis, beginning. So without life in the beginning or in the origin. So abiogenesis, spontaneous creation, it's also known as life from non-life. Now, I want to say that a lot of evolutionists today try to stay away from abiogenesis. It's kind of like one of these black box subjects that you don't really want to talk about because it's messy. It's tricky to talk about life coming from non-life. You know what I'm saying? So basically, what is it basically teaching us, abiogenesis? Well, basically it teaches us soup to cells. There's another one, huh? I don't think it's quite as good as this, as my one, but soup to cells we'll go with. Man to molecules. Okay? Soup to cells, abiogenesis. We start off with what's known as a quantum fluctuation. All right? A quantum fluctuation. And we've talked about this quantum fluctuation. We don't know where it came from. We don't know why it decided to do its quantum fluctuation thing at any point in time. Apparently, it's there and it obeys all sorts of laws that had to be there for it to do what it did. But where those laws came from, we don't know. But we've got our quantum fluctuation. All right? So we start off with this quantum fluctuation. And for some reason, this quantum fluctuation decided that it was about time that it had a party and have a Big Bang. So it did the Big Bang. All right? And this Big Bang created hydrogen and helium. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Which somehow condensed into stars. We've not actually been able to do that in a laboratory today. We've got plenty of hydrogen and helium, but it did it, okay? It's condensed into stars, and the stars formed 92 elements, which then combined to form all of the compounds and the molecules. Our fluctuation, we've got our Big Bang. The Big Bang forms all of our atoms. These form all of our stars. These form the 92 elements. And after the 92 elements, we get our compounds and our molecules forming. And out of our compounds and our molecules, we eventually get RNA and DNA forming. Again, I haven't spoken much about RNA and DNA in this particular lecture. I did last year. You'll understand how many terabytes of information are contained in the coding along a DNA strand. And not only to mention that a code doesn't mean anything unless there's a language behind the code in itself. Just, so I could write letters on the board. They wouldn't mean anything unless you understood that there was a language to which the letters were attached. So we create RNA and DNA, and then we create out of that a self-replicating protocell. So this is where essentially a general theory of evolution teaches that from the fluctuation, we eventually get the self-replicating protocell. That's actually called the last universal common ancestor. So all of us came from this replicating protocell. So they've got a couple of theories about this replicating protocell that are flying around today. And the main one is warm pools. Well, it's not the main one. It was the one that was popular for a long time. Warm pools, we all like a warm pool. A jacuzzi is far better than a cold pool. And we reckon warm pools are probably where life started from. This protocell, this is where all these chemicals got together and finally decided we're going to partake in the warm pool and we're going to make ourselves some RNA and come to life. And the warm pool theory just didn't cut it. And there were a lot of reasons for that. And so in a lot of the latest documentaries from Attenborough, they tend to go for the hydrothermal vents. Okay, and if you look at the latest documentaries, they're into hydrothermal vents because this is right deep under the sea, and you've got these superheated water coming up out of the bottom of the ocean at tremendous depths. And they've actually discovered that there are, creatures that are actually living there called extremophiles. Okay, and these extremophiles are actually surviving in this huge amounts of temperature with all sorts of poison gases and sulfur and Lord only knows what going on there. And they're like, oh, there we can see life is surviving under these extreme circumstances. The other one is alien DNA. Don't laugh. There's some top guys that are, proposing that aliens came along. The Earth doesn't have enough time to have created life. It's not old enough. You can just do the maths and work backwards. It needs to be far older than it is. Therefore, life probably came with aliens. And they decided that this was a really cool place to do the grim deed, and boom. The other one is, of course, meteorites. Very popular. It came on meteorites, and it came to Earth through that. So we quickly have a look at the hydrothermal vents. Attenborough says clearly vents. Clearly. Okay? If a professional says clearly, you pretty much know that it's fact, right? Okay? Clearly, vents such as these could have supported the first microorganisms that appeared in the primeval seas nearly 4,000 million years ago. Well, let's just talk a little bit about these extremophiles that exist in these vents today. All right? First of all, you need to understand that how do these organisms survive in these extremely hostile environments? Now, please understand that the first common ancestor, as promoted by the general theory of evolution, had to be an extremely simple protocell. The bare essentials that allowed it to survive and to replicate. Okay, that in itself is a problem, because in order to survive and replicate, there's some real issues around that. Because you can't be very simple and replicate and survive in these conditions. Now, if you have a look at the extremophiles that exist today, they have special enzymes, okay, built into their systems that allow them to survive in the high temperatures. Because high temperatures do what? They break down organic molecules, all right? So these guys have to survive in these extremely high temperatures. Living creatures near the vents, therefore, have elaborate repair systems. All right? In fact, these extremophiles have 3 backup copies of their DNA sequences. All right? That doesn't sound simple to me. The ocean is huge, absolutely vast. How did these amino acids find each other in the first place to join together, to form the proteins, to begin to actually create RNA and DNA? All experiments to date that we have had to do in order to try to produce any type of life have required intelligence behind it. And all of these experiments that are trying to create amino acids and trying to create simple compounds are requiring vast amounts of money, intelligence from scientists all across the world to do it. All they're really doing is it takes intelligence to produce simple compounds and proteins. So these extremophiles, they have special enzymes, they have special stabilized DNA, they have special salty cells, they have special sugar, and they've got a special rapid repair mechanism for their DNA in order to be able to survive. They are anything but simple prototypes, or protocells to survive in this. So due to these and other problems, and there are a lot of problems, and I haven't got time to go into it, a lot of scientists have decided there's not enough time on Earth to create that. There's too many problems trying to do that. They've turned to what they call the panspermia theory, which is the life from the meteors, which is probably the more common one today, or becoming the more popular one. Panspermia, the Greek from all seed, okay? All seed. Essentially saying that seeds of life are everywhere in the universe. And so what they've actually gone and done for this is that they actually attached some hardy bacterium onto the nose cone or the heat shield of a Russian spacecraft. And they wanted to actually see if that we put this bacteria on the nose cone, the heat shield of this Russian spacecraft, this thing's going to come back into the atmosphere pretty much like a meteor, and we'll then examine the bacteria and we'll pretty much prove that life could have come on meteors, which is pretty cool. So they wanted to simulate this, attached it to a Russian spacecraft, the Photon M3 capsule. The rocks, they took a whole lot of attached rocks to the heat shield. They smeared it with a hardy bacterium supposed to resemble a proposed germ on Mars. They used a hardy bacterium, okay, something that was big hair on its chest, okay. The spacecraft then was retrieved after it entered back into orbit, and the retrieved bacterium was totally burned black, but the outlines still remained of the bacterium. The results were problematic and showed at least 2 centimeters of rock was not enough to protect the organisms during atmospheric entry. The re-entry speed was also a lot slower than that of a meteorite, incidentally, so they would have needed a lot more than the 2 inches that they had. The detailed examination of the meteorites has led NASA to state the elemental abundance data is equivocal. The filaments appear to have similar chemical composition to the rest of the surrounding rock, but provide absolutely no evidence for ET life. Essentially, it was the real fancy way of saying it didn't work. There was no life. They died. Okay? It didn't work. Man has tried to create life, believe it or not. And the most famous experiment that most of you will be familiar with, I hope, would be the Stanley Miller and Harold Urey experiment of 1953. You guys familiar with it? Not. Okay, we'll go with it. Now you're going to be. This experiment where essentially Stanley Miller decided that he was going to take the gases that were used in the primordial earth. He was going to put it in a glass jar, and he was going to create an electric spark, which was meant to sort of simulate lightning, and he was going to prove that you could create life from these simple gases, hydrogen and ammonia and so forth. And so he basically set up this elaborate experiment, and a high voltage electric spark was used to simulate lightning. A trap was used to collect the end products. The result was a tarry substance with some amino acids in the tarry substance. It was hailed all over the world, and it's still everywhere today. I went on the web today, and it's just absolutely everywhere. We can create life. So there was a couple of problems with this, though. And I'll just mention, no oxygen was used by him. Now, oxygen wasn't used by him because if he had used oxygen, it wouldn't have worked. The problem is that all science today believes that the early Earth atmosphere was full of oxygen. So he left that out because it wouldn't have worked. Secondly, he used a specific trap, a special trap, to try and isolate the amino acids so that they wouldn't get totally destroyed immediately. Well, that doesn't exist in nature. All right? We don't have these elaborate little... The amino acids that were produced were the wrong chirality. Essentially, that means that they were right-handed instead of left-handed. In order for an amino acid to be of any value in forming a protein, it needs to be left-handed. These were not. Okay, they were a combination of. As soon as you get a combination, it destroys itself. Okay? Minute quantities were made, nowhere near enough to create a protein. The wrong sequences, they weren't in the specific order, and we'll talk about that just now, where the amino acids need to be in the right order in order to be of any value. It would like me having the 26 letters of the alphabet and just putting them in any order and saying, what do you think? All right? No reproductive capability at all. No RNA was formed. No DNA was formed. And absolutely no proteins were formed. And chain end compounds were formed, which that prevent any polypeptides actually forming as well. So essentially, no life was created in any shape or form. If Miller's experiment shows anything, it is that life cannot form from non-life, even with intelligent intervention. I'll show you this quick video on this one. You guys still with us? Okay, here we go.
Stanley Miller put together a glass apparatus, and in that apparatus he put a mixture of gases that people at the time thought reflected the atmosphere of the early Earth. And probably the early Earth's atmosphere then consisted of what we now see coming out of volcanoes today. namely carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. Well, if the early Earth's atmosphere consisted of those gases, then Stanley Miller's experiment would not work. In fact, he himself tried it with those gases, and he found that he couldn't produce any amino acids at all. So the experiment falls apart once you use a more realistic mixture of gases in the apparatus.
Miller's test has been repeated many times using the correct atmospheric components. The results are always the same. The amino acids that generated so much enthusiasm in 1953 do not appear.
All right, so the first assumption behind evolution is that what they call spontaneous generation occurred. Now, all that is when they say spontaneous generation in this context, all that means is somehow dead chemicals came to life. There was no life, and then all of a sudden, in some sort of primordial ooze, here comes something that's alive and is somehow able to reproduce itself. That's called spontaneous generation. Now, evolutionist Kirkett says that's an assumption. Now, why is that an assumption? Well, because they can't make it happen. With all of the sophisticated laboratory equipment we have today, we have every kind of chemical you can think of, we have every kind of powerful computer. So on the campuses where I go, I'll say to the professors that are arguing against creation and for evolution, I'll say, okay, look, you've got those computers, you've got the laboratory equipment, you've got every chemical, mix them up, make it come to life. That's all you have to do. Because evolution assumes that that happened at one time in the past.
Apparently intelligence can't do what chance managed to do. So where does that leave us? Well, first of all, you need to understand that abiogenesis violates the law of biogenesis. And the law of biogenesis states that life can only come from life. It's something that we can validate and see happening every day. The counter-arguments by atheists for the law of biogenesis and for all of this are the following. The counter-arguments are the following. They say that the law of biogenesis does not apply to early Earth. It changed. At some point in time, it doesn't apply to early Earth. Well, the law of biogenesis is a scientific law because it meets the criteria of being simple, true, universal, and absolute. In order to meet these criteria, there has not been any known exception ever to the law of biogenesis. A scientific law is defined as a principle that is taken to be universally acceptable. You can't just state, well, it doesn't apply then. It's a universal law. Secondly, that they'll state is that the law of biogenesis does not apply to less complex life forms. It only applies to complicated life forms. Well, the law of biogenesis states that life can only come from life. It makes no distinction between single-celled, simple organisms, or multicellular organisms. There have been many experiments in which scientists have tried to create life from non-living material. All of these experiments have been unsuccessful in creating life. Scientifically, it should then be assumed that the law of biogenesis is as applicable to single-cell organisms as it is to multi-cell organisms. The law should only be refuted if a scientist was somehow able to create life from non-living material. Until then, it stands. Those arguments are not scientific. Sorry, the last comment there. Biogenesis at first, biogenesis ever since, is taught today as fact. That exact statement. All right, you'll go anywhere, they'll teach that biogenesis at first, biogenesis ever since. So there's the exception, and you'll read that at any varsity. What's the probability of a biologically active protein forming by chance? You'll have a look that Sir Fred Hoyle actually says that the likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to the power of a number with 40,000 noughts after it. It is big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. There was no primeval soup, neither on this planet nor on any other. And if the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. Essentially, he gives an example of 10 to the 40 blind persons standing shoulder to shoulder. They would fill our entire planetary system, and each one has a Rubik's Cube that's been scrambled. conceive the chance of all of them simultaneously arriving at the solved form of the Rubik Cube. And you get some sort of idea of the odds that we're talking about. It's just absolutely astronomical. All right. Let's get down to empirical evidence. Everyone's going about fact, and let's talk about actual fact. Let's not talk about theory. Let's just be empirical. Well, what's the empirical evidence? There remains no known process acting in nature to produce life from non-life. Therefore, abiogenesis exists out of the realm of empirical science. It's not science. All right? And to call it science is problematic. Secondly, the extreme complexity of all life forms seems to point in the direction of an established intelligence outside of nature. I love what Rabbi Zacharias says. He says, atheism is not a belief in which one believes in nothing, but it is rather a belief in which one is willing to believe in just about anything. The second one that we want to mention then quickly is common descent. And I'm going to try and move on a bit quicker now. Common descent, essentially life from a common ancestor. Our last universal protocell, our common ancestor, all life came from that one cell, that one protocell. Can you believe that that's actually taught? I find it absolutely amazing. The common ancestor is referred to as the last universal common ancestor. Say hi. Everyone say hi. That's your great granddaddy. All right? Apparently, according to the science, there is strong evidence that all living organisms on Earth are descended from a common ancestor called the last universal common ancestor. Hello, granddaddy. Good-looking dude, though. All right. This is a theoretical protocell made up of only 2 molecular components, and an RNA ribcase and a fatty acid membrane. This protocell is an extremely simple version of a cell, but nonetheless is capable of growth, replication, and evolution. Well, there's an oxymoron straight there. If it's a simple cell, but it's capable of growth, replication, and evolution, have you any idea of what's required in order for a cell to grow, replicate, and evolve? It's interesting, if you compare our great-great-granddaddy with a modern cell, there's a fair amount in there that needs to happen. An entire world, in fact. All right? The amount of DNA change, information that has to be added to a DNA in order to go from that to that, absolutely astronomical. Adenosine diphosphate. Okay. This little job is a motor. It is a genuine motor. Now, we did speak the other day about the flagellum motor. Do you remember the flagellum motor? And we showed you this little tail that spins around. This motor makes the flagellum motor look like an accident, all right? For a start, it is millions of times smaller, all right? This particular motor, all right, has to be in every living cell, virtually every living cell, in order for it to work. It supplies, okay, the energy, the currency of life that is found on every living cell on Earth. If you want to know where you get your energy from, right down to we know we eat food and candy floss and we get our energy from that. But if you go right down to the lowest levels, what's actually making your little energy? These motors actually are the currency of life. They produce the power found on every living cell. It's a complex molecular motor measuring less than 40 nanometers across. It is insignificantly tiny. It's so small that you can get 200,000. That's a big number. 200,000 on a pinhead of these motors. Okay? This chemical motor has, every cell in your body has thousands of these motors in them. It spins 6,000 revolutions per minute. That's pretty cool. I mean, can you imagine millions of these little jobs in your body right now spinning at 6,000 revolutions per minute? All right? If this motor, this is what I want you to hear. If this motor did not exist, okay, all living things would die. So this simple protocell, okay, had to have ATP motor in it. Let's have a quick look at this simple little cell with this simple little ATP. Quick little video, all right?
This animated sequence shows the ATP synthase enzyme in operation. The animation is based on an incredible series of scientific discoveries. Only the colors show artistic license. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the energy currency of the cell. ATP is produced by a tiny molecular rotary motor, rotating at up to 7,000 RPM. These are so small that 100,000 would fit side by side in a millimeter. A current of protons drives the motor, unlike man-made electric motors which use electrons. This portion of the enzyme is where adenosine diphosphate is combined with a phosphate ion in the presence of a catalyst to produce ATP, which is then released, making way for the next cycle. A top view of the enzyme shows the sequential operation. Almost every biochemical process in your body requires ATP. Such a nanomachine exhibits all the characteristics of super-intelligent design. ATP is vital for life, and many of these motors were needed before the first living cell could exist. An evolutionary impossibility.
I'll leave it there. The simple protocell had to have ATP. That ATP alone is made up of many, many components, all of which have to work perfectly together. Do you remember we spoke about irreducible complexity? Start taking away components of that ATP motor, it's going to be of no value. Every single component that makes up an ATP motor had to come into existence simultaneously and merge together in order for it to actually work. All right. An evolutionary impossibility. The complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great, it is impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. Evolutionist Professor Paul Davies, many investigators feel uneasy stating in public that the origin of life is a mystery, even though behind closed doors they admit they're baffled. It is the software of the living cell that is the real mystery, not the hardware. How did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. We've talked a little bit about abiogenesis, life from non-life. It's a real problem. We've talked a little bit about common ancestry, everything coming from this single cell. And we'll talk a little bit about that just now. What drives this single cell to turn into everything else? How does it do that? How does the molecule turn into the man? All right? So we've got 3 ways that it does it, and I did mention them earlier. The first one is genetic variation. All right? You guys? Genetic variation. Who's heard of that? All right? Genetic variation is changes in DNA. Your DNA gets changed. Okay? Now, it can be changed due to mutation or something we call recombination. I'm really focusing on mutation. You all know that if a woman's DNA gets exposed to radiation when she's pregnant, that it can actually damage the DNA in the fetus as it's forming, and that child can actually be born with all sorts of problems, mutations and so forth. And we've seen that a mutation in a parent can actually be passed on to the child, and the child can have various diseases and so forth that were inherent in the parents. So we all understand that the fact that DNA changes due to mutation and recombination can happen. All right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. The second one is natural selection, which is simply putting it, is saying that it's a way of these mutations that are being caused and these changes in the DNA being preserved and carried through. Okay? And then the last one is speciation. Simply put, a mutation happens and recombination happens due to a whole series of different processes. I've got some graphs there. I actually can hardly see them myself, but we've got duplication, we've got deletion, we've got inversion, we've got insertion, we've got translocation. These are various ways in which mutation can occur in your DNA. I wanted you to just have a quick look at this. Here's a typical sequence or a base sequence in a DNA, GAG, all right? There's the 3 letters forming your base sequence, GAG. What happens in those, in a sickle cell anemia is that the A there is actually been, the DNA has been damaged, and actually the A has been replaced with a T. So it's reading GTG. The messaging RNA, okay, that messages, converts that GAG correctly into CTG in a normal, but here it gets converted into, the T gets actually converted into an A. And you guys, if you were with me last year, you'll remember I showed you how all of that worked. And it gets converted by the messenger RNA into CAC. The transport RNA then converts that correctly in the normal cell back to GAG. Here it gets converted falsely into GUG, and the final amino acid will contain GLU in a normal, but in a sickle cell, it'll actually contain the letters VAL, all right, that are actually put in there. And actually what happens is that out of 1,632, okay, letters, that one change, okay, results in clumped hemoglobin. One letter incorrect out of 1,362 letters in one amino acid causes that change. Cystic fibrosis is one letter incorrect out of 4,440 letters. 4,440 letters have to all be exactly in perfect order. One letter, and you can have cystic fibrosis. One letter. Mutations almost always result in a loss of functionality. Now, the evolutionists go on about mutations happening, and they call them beneficial mutations. And what happens is that somebody gets a beneficial mutation, and he becomes slightly more survival of the fittest, advantageous than somebody else, and so we go. So let's just have a look at mutations. Mutations almost always result in devastating loss of functionality. Progeria. All right? SCID, severe combined immunodeficiency disorder, or the bubble disease, the boy in the bubble disease, you'll be familiar with it. A disorder in which individuals are born without an effective immune system. Progeria is accelerated aging, where kids look as though they're a lot, they look a lot older than they are. Hypertrichosis, or the werewolf syndrome. All right? These are caused by small mutations in the DNA that cause these. And you can see they always result in a loss of functionality. Now, evolutionists have found a couple of really rare instances where mutations are beneficial. Okay? And they'll talk about beneficial mutations. They're really difficult to find. They've got a few that they talk about. The big one that you'll hear them talking about is sickle cell anemia. Okay? And this particular one allows you essentially to give you a lot more chance of surviving if you get malaria, if you've got this particular mutation in your gene. Okay? You need to understand that this particular genetic default in your gene, okay, does give you more chance to survive malaria. If you happen to live in a malaria-infested environment, it's probably not a bad thing to have sickle cell anemia, because you'll probably have less chance of getting malaria. If you don't live in that environment, you're stuffed, okay, because it's got some serious drawbacks. You know what I'm saying? And malaria will probably be the least of your worries. Okay? So to say it's beneficial is a little bit of a stretch. It's kind of like saying, my computer's really great because it makes a great doorstop. Look how great this is. It's kind of like defeating the purpose here. You know what I'm saying? So you need to be really, really careful about that. They'll go on about bacterial resistance to antibiotics. They talk about CCR5 delta 32 slowing the progress of AIDS, lactose persistence in humans, and they go on and on about these various so-called mutations that are advantageous. They're advantageous in very specific circumstances and in very specific environments. But invariably, they have some serious side effects that are big drawbacks. And more than that, okay, actually have a look at the sickle cell. You can see it here. See that's why you can't get malaria, okay? Because it's not normal. All right? So it protects you from, as a side effect, protects you from malaria. But there's a whole lot of downsides to that. You're as sick as a dog for a start. Okay? All of these so-called mutations involve loss of what? Code. Loss of information. Something's been damaged. Something's been lost or put in the wrong order. Has anything been added? Nothing's been added. Something's been rearranged or something's been knocked out of place. Okay, but new information hasn't been added. Stuff's just been rearranged. It's really important to understand that. They all involve decay of prior information. All right. So all of these examples, and I could give you plenty of examples around the downsides of each of these. CCR5 delta 32 mutated gene, which results from deletion of a particular sequence of 32 base pairs. This mutant form of the gene results in a receptor so damaged that it no longer functions. The CCR5 delta 32 mutation is strongly associated with chronic and potentially life-threatening liver disease. You may have left chance of getting AIDS, but you're going to have chronic life-threatening liver disease. All right. So they all involve decay of prior information. All right. I could go into a fair amount of that, but I'm going to skip it. So mutations cannot create information to produce a new genome. Mutations can rearrange existing information, but they cannot create new information. Now, please understand, if you're going to go from a simple protocell to that cell that I showed you with all of that stuff in it, let's not even talk about changing from a simple protocell into me or into a tadpole turning into a dinosaur. The amount of information that has to be added for that change to occur is huge. Mutations cannot create information or produce a new genome. Mutations can rearrange existing information, but they can't create new information. It's one of the single biggest things you need to challenge an evolutionist. Show me ever where a mutation has created new information. But not only has it got to be new information, it has to be vast amounts of new information to turn a molecule into a man. All right? Mutations almost always result in reduction in functionality. They talk about survival of the fittest. Trust me, if you get a mutation, it normally means you're pretty much dead. It doesn't give you an advantage. Invariably, it's a disadvantage. That mutation. Thirdly, mutations can produce new traits, okay, which is a corruption of existing information. Moving on, mutations can create new varieties of old genes, which is a duplication of existing information. There are no known information gaining mutations of the order necessary for molecules to man. All right. There is nothing that can do that. All right. That is mutations. Quickly, natural selection. So what natural selection does is it takes these mutations that have happened, okay, and it says, wow, this is a really cool mutation. It's giving me an advantage. Therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it. And that's what we know as survival of the fittest. All right, so it's mutations and natural selections. We have no problem as a creationist with natural selection. It happens all the time. It's not evolution. Can I show you that natural selection is not evolution? You ready for this one? Let me show you that it's not evolution. All right. This is an example of natural selection. We see in this example that natural selection has preserved a mutation in the gene resulting in what's known as the floppy ear syndrome. Okay? There's been a mutation in the dog's ear gene that in fact has resulted in a floppy ears, and that has been preserved. Okay? All right? It's probably been preserved because we like dogs with soft floppy ears, and so we made sure that they had lots of babies. All right? But the essence is this is not evolution. Okay? Natural selection preserves the ruining of existing genes. Okay? How cool is that cat, by the way? As you can probably realize, the gene in this particular dog has actually not, it's been preserved through natural selection, but it's actually been wrecked. This dog, okay, has to have serious ear hygiene. Otherwise, it's going to get ear infections. This dog has not got the ability to hear, to hunt, and to survive anything like a dog with pointy ears has got. Its hearing is impaired. Okay? Dogs with erect ears are far superior to floppy-eared dogs at detecting prey by sound. So we can see that dogs with this genetic mutation have weaker cartilage, they cannot lift up their ears, and it's actually a disadvantage. Okay? So we understand that mutation, or natural selection, preserves the ruining of existing genes. That is not evolution. It is a gene that has been mutated and simply been preserved. All right? Secondly, we see that natural selection preserves the rearranging. So not only the wrecking or the ruining of genes, but it preserves the rearranging of existing genes. Can we see this here? Yeah, we can see this. Can we see these two dogs here? This is mom and dad. Mom and dad have got genes inside of them for short hair and for long hair. Mom's got it, and dad's got short hair and long hair genes. They decide they're going to do the grim deed, nothing on the telly, and they have some babies. And they have 4 kitties. This kitty here picks up the short hair gene from the mom and the short hair gene from the dad and has what? Short hair. Got for the short hairs. This one here got a short hair from the mom and a long hair from the dad, and so has medium length hair. Kind of a combo going on there. And same there. And we'll see that they essentially have the same length of hair as mom and dad. They've got a short and a long that they picked up from each. And we see that the final offspring here actually got the long hair from the mom and the long hair from the dad, and it's got a big fluffy coat. Now, you could probably, as an evolutionist, have a look at the dog with the long hair and have a look at the parents that have both got medium hair and say, evolution has occurred. We have now evolved long-haired dogs. That's not what's happened at all. There's no evolution. No information has been added. All that simply happened is rearranging of what? Existing information. That is not evolution. All right? No new genes have been added. Okay? Lastly, natural selection preserves removing. So it preserves ruining, it preserves rearranging, and it preserves removing of genes, removing of existing genes. And we see in this particular instance that our dogs that we've just got, we decide that we're going to send these dogs off to the North Pole, and off they go to the North Pole. Well, what pretty much happens fairly quickly is that our dog with the 2 short genes, or no hair genes, dies. First time it snows. This thing kisses over. Going, it freezes to death. Not so good. We find the one with the sort of the medium hair also dies in the snowy weather, as does his brother. So these dogs die. But Fluffy is as happy as he survives along with his mate, the male and the female, and they produce themselves 4 nice, fluffy dogs, which they would do because they only contain the variation of the genes that are for long fur. Has evolution occurred? No. We've just simply, natural selection has removed all the short-haired genes from the pack, and you're only left with a set of dogs with the long hair. Has evolution occurred? No. So in every instance, natural selection can remove genes, it can rearrange genes, and it can wreck genes. But no new genes, no new information is ever added. This is not selection. And we see that in all of these famous examples that come from Dorku and other. You'll be familiar with Darwin's finches with the beaks. What has happened with these beaks is that existing information has simply been rearranged, or the weak genes have been removed from the pack, and they've ended up with these different type of beaks. We see the same thing with the moths, and we see the same thing with the long-necked tortoises. These are all famous examples of natural selection that are used to support evolution. Whereas all that's happened in each of these instances, no new information has been added. Simply genes have been rearranged or removed or recombined in some way to produce this. Natural selection is a selective process, not a creative process. It explains survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest. All right. Great. So it all comes down to the degree of change possible via mutation and the extrapolation of these changes over time. Moving on as quickly as I can, speciation, the evolution tree, and you're all familiar with it. We start off with our common ancestor, our universal common ancestor, and what actually happens is they believe everything came from this one cell. So all of our different phylum, our different classes, our different order, our different genus, everything came from that. Men, donkeys, frogs, bacteria, you name it. The creationist believes, for the morphology, we would believe that God created kinds, okay, as in the Bible. And from these kinds, there's no crossing over. So God created different kinds of animals, okay? Man, horses, lions and tigers, frogs, etc. And that these different kinds, we believe, can evolve through adaptation, speciation, into different types of dogs, long-haired dogs, short-haired dogs, dogs with blue eyes, dogs with green eyes, big dogs, little dogs, all those things. And we believe it's possible, okay, to evolve into slightly different species. It's rare, but we believe it can happen. And a species, we talk about an animal that can mate and produce offspring with another. So tigers and lions, for example, those type of things. So we don't have an issue with that, but we don't feel that it's a common issue. But there's a lot different from a horse and a donkey, or from a lion and a tiger, to something like a man and a molecule. All right, it's the degree of change that we're talking about. So just to summarize, this is important. The evolutionists would say that mutations are beneficial and point out that sickle cell anemia will make you immune to malaria. We'll say that mutations are not generally at all ever beneficial. All right? They'll say that new genetic information is getting created all the time. We'll say existing genetic information is just getting rearranged and altered. Nothing new has been added. And we talked about the 3 R's. All right? They'll say that mutations are advantageous to the organism. We'll say it's advantageous to the organism extremely rarely. Okay? They'll say this advantage is preserved via the offspring, and we'll agree with that. We believe that advantages are preserved by the offspring. We just showed you the furry dogs. They're winning. They'll say that you can extrapolate these changes over a long period of time and eventually turn molecules into men. We'll say you can extrapolate, but only over a lesser time. They'll say that new traits are possible. We'll say new traits are possible by natural selection. We don't have a problem with that. They'll talk about new species. We'll say new species are possible, but unlikely. They'll say that much new genetic information is added. We'll say no, it's just been rearranged. All right. They'll talk about new genomes being created. So we say that new genomes are not possible. Large evolutionary innovations are not well understood. None has ever been observed. We have no idea whether any may be in progress. There is no good fossil record of any. And again, Sir Fred Hoyle, as common sense would suggest, the Darwinian theory is correct in the small, but not in the large. Rabbits come from slightly different rabbits, but not from primeval soup or from potatoes. All right. Okay. I'm going to just literally buzz through these because I want to be finished in 5 minutes for you. The fossil record. It's our best friend. It really is our best friend. It's actually, you'll find that people like Dawkins and that are referring less and less to the fossil record and more to biological evolution to support their GTE. They'll talk about microbes and flies and things changing, and we can see it. But they stay away from the fossil record. There's a good reason for that. The fossil record is our best friend. It truly is. If you were to see the slide, you would see that the red is where the fossil record exists. The dotted lines are pretty much where it doesn't. All right? Evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, but not based on the evidence of fossils. And if you have a quick look in the textbooks, you'll see pretty much that. Who's seen that in the textbooks? Pretty much what you get. Actually, what they've got is that. All right? We don't have a fossil tree, we have fossil twigs, kind of floating in the air with nothing in between them. Okay? And that's the truth of it. Okay? A couple of the reasons why. Let's just look. You said that I should at least show you a photo of the fossil from which each type of organism was derived. I will lay it on the line. There's not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. All right. So just basically, first question, why do living fossils remain unchanged for millions and millions of years? Here we've got an example of a fossil. All right. And here we've got an example of the living creature today. Okay, this, in the time period, this garfish is 54 million years old. This, apparently, 54 million years old. In 54 million years, all right, evolution has changed worms into humans. Why is this little sod pretty much identical? It's a real issue. Horseshoe crab, 200 million years. There's the fossil. There's the living one today. Identical. The coelacanth. We all remember the coelacanth found near Cape Town, where I'm from. There's the fossil, and they assumed that this was it's dubbed a living fossil. It shocked scientists around the world who thought that this type of fish had died out millions and millions of years due to the process of evolution. There it is, living. Quickly, some false assumptions. Evolution is full of false assumptions. The original find, okay, of the Pachyctus. There's the original find. From that, they put together the reconstruction, which was basically this sort of half fish, half mammal, half thing that crawled out and made it. The correction came out a little later. All right? The feathered dinosaur fossil came out in National Geographic. We can now say that birds are four-limbed mammals, just as confidently as we can say that humans are mammals. All right? The feathered dinosaur pictures are simply imaginary, have no place outside of science fiction. All right? It was discovered that a Chinese farmer had dug a fossil up in two separate areas of a shell pit, pasted the pieces together, and sold the resulting composite clandestinely through a middleman for fear of his life. Ended up being bought by somebody for $80,000. Okay, it was a fake. He glued some wings onto something else, and that was pretty cool. All right. Archaeopteryx is also half bird, half reptile. This was a big one. Been disproved. It's been abandoned completely. It was originally hailed as the missing link between birds and reptiles, however, later found to be a true bird and not half bird or half reptile. And there's a whole lot of reasons I've got for that. It's been abandoned as a missing link. False ape men. This is a really good one. False ape men abound. Okay? Java man and Peking man, reclassified as Homo erectus. Pilton man, a hoax based on a human skull cap and orangutan's jaw, widely publicized as a missing link for 40 years. Different types of skeletons created from single teeth that eventually were found to be the pig's tooth, Nebraska man. That the Piltdown hoax could deceive so many for 40 years is extraordinary. That the theory of evolution itself could deceive so many for even a longer period is tragic. Tiktaalik, the first fish-shaped pteropod transition. This is the one that Attenborough uses. Here's our creature, Attenborough's answer to the problem of how ancient fish could have managed to get out of the water onto the land. It's vigorously promoted by evolutionists as being a 375 million year old extinct transitional link that was on its way to becoming the first four-legged land vertebrae. In 2006, the fossil was featured on the cover of Nature. There we go. I've got the picture there. When fins became limbs, the article said, "This is really what our ancestors looked like when they began to leave the water." Cool. All right. Attenborough then goes in his documentary and shows the fossil limbs with his digits, and he says this is most certainly the first limb to move a creature onto land. Pretty cool. Well, alas for Tikalik. Okay? The assumption has now been falsified. Several well-preserved footprints undoubtedly made by four-legged animals were found in Poland in rock dated 18 million years older than Tikalik. In 2010, Nature admitted they force a radical reassessment of the timing, ecology, and environmental setting of the fish-pteropod transition. All right. So, there you go. And I won't go into all of them. Who knows Haeckel's drawings? Who's all seen them? Okay, totally proved false. All right? Haeckel's drawings are substantially fabricated. His images are made up of bits and pieces from different animals. It is not unreasonable to characterize this as faking. Sadly as it is, these discredited drawings are used by many British and American biology textbooks even today. Thoroughly discredited. Questions to ask evolutionists. Guys, if you want to ask them, how does non-life produce life? How does non-life produce life? The law of biogenetics. How can mutations create huge volumes of beneficial mutation? We've seen mutations are mixing up information. They're not adding huge volumes of information. Why has natural selection taught us evolution when it's not creative? It isn't. Irreducibly complex systems cannot evolve bit by bit. We saw the ATP motor. It needs to all be there at the same time working together to produce the currency of life. It can't evolve bit by bit. All right? And we talked about the mousetrap. You remember some of that stuff? Where are the expected millions of transitional fossils? We don't see anything in the fossil record that shows us transition between genomes. It's just not there. How do living fossils remain unchanged for millions of years? Coelacanth. Why are they not evolving into, I don't know, something? Dinosaur coelacanths. Probabilities of biologically active proteins forming by chance. 10 to the power, what did we say, 40 or 80 or 4,000 or some huge figure? Just staggering amounts of improbability. How did biological information in the form of DNA come to exist? How do you create a DNA? Never mind the code and the language behind the code. All right? Ultimately, the Darwinian theory for evolution is no more nor less than the great cosmogenic myth of the 20th century. Biological evolution only exists as a fact in philosophy, not in science. In Grimm's, you kiss a frog, and in 2 seconds it becomes a prince. In evolution, you kiss a frog, and in 2 million years it becomes a prince. Both are fairy tales. All right, I've got one last little video to show you, and we're done. All right, we good?
Neo-Darwinism and its associated theories of chemical evolution and the like will not be able to survive the biology of the information age, the biology of the 21st century.
When I look at the evidence objectively, without ruling out the possibility of design, design just leaps up as the most likely explanation. And that's why I believe that it's true.
We can't explain these systems by natural law. And if we're searching for truth, and they are in fact designed, if we have to be design engineers to understand them, then I say, what's the problem? You know, you go where the data leads you. And the implications, yeah, they have profound metaphysical implications, but so be it.
For several centuries, we've been told that the universe does not have us in mind. That is, that we exist in a small speck of dust in a very large universe, and that the universe was not designed for beings like us. Our argument suggests something completely different. It suggests that the universe was intended, that the universe exists for a purpose.
The laws of physics are balanced on a razor's edge for life to occur. What you have is a universe that is not only finely tuned for life to occur, but also has a beautiful, elegant mathematical structure, and a structure such that we can discover that structure.
There's something about the universe that can't be simply explained just by the impersonal forces of nature and atoms colliding with atoms. And so you have to reach for something beyond the universe to try to account for it.
The founders of modern science, like Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo and Newton himself, believed that the universe was the product of a mind, that it was intelligible to beings like ourselves because the universe itself was the product of an intelligent being.
I was trained in journalism and law to respond to truth. I had to take a step of faith in the same direction that evidence is flowing. You don't have to commit intellectual suicide to come to the conclusion that there is an intelligent designer. Because today, science is pointing more directly and more powerfully toward a creator than any other time in the history of the world.
All right, guys, thank you for your attention. Sorry if I was a few minutes over. There's a lot to go through. I really appreciate your attention, and I hope that you're feeling... I'm hoping that it's giving you something to think about, and when people do speak to you about evolution, that you've got some things that somewhere in the back of your mind you'll think, I remember abiogenesis, or I remember common descent, and some of these things will come to you and provide you with some type of ammunition or defense that you'll have. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.